Hello students, welcome back to geography class with Miss Lemon. This is going to be lesson 5 where we talk about climate and weather. In my textbook, this comes at the very end of chapter 2. Before we get started, feel free to pause the video, post a comment about how you're feeling. Sometimes it helps to just send off those thoughts you're having into the void, but I will definitely give a response to you. So when we get started, talking about climate and weather, we do have to differentiate between the two because they do seem pretty similar. When we're talking about weather, a lot of people have a really intuitive idea what that is. We can give examples of weather, but how would we really define weather, especially if that ends up on a quiz or a test, for example? So weather is going to be the current status. It's stuff that involves wind, temperature differences, precipitation, cloud cover, and it changes hourly. I pulled up a weather forecast if anyone wants to guess. Of course, I'm going to give you guys the answer as well. When I pulled this up, it was minus 38 degrees Celsius with a humidity of 48%, not a ton of humidity, and very clear, not a lot of cloud cover. Any guesses where it would be not so humid, not very cloudy because it's not so humid, and pretty cold? If you guess McMurdo Station, Antarctica, you are correct. So if we know that's what weather is, what's the difference between that and climate? So the climate is just the weather averaged out over 30 years. This is really important for us because we want to know different trends. And you can try to think of some different things, maybe pause the video and think of some different reasons we would want to know about the climate. I'm going to scratch next to my nose while you guys think about that. Some of the jobs that might be interested in this are different types of jobs that involve the ocean, for example. Because of the difference in wind, the difference in temperature, we do want to be careful that we're not on the ocean or in different parts of the ocean during times of the year where it might be quite choppy, windy. We do want to be careful too with the wind. Back when we had sailboats or types of really big ships with sails, I guess we still have sailboats today, but I'm talking about before we had ships that had a motor on them. When that happens, or that's the type of thing that you need, of course you need wind to power you. So you needed to know parts of the earth that either had very low wind, times of the year that had low wind. There are also sections of, for example, the Pacific Ocean that just don't get wind much of the year ever. And if you get stuck there, you got stuck there. And that's a really bad position to be in. Other jobs that would be interested in this, of course, include agriculture. And when we think of agriculture as a job, sometimes we think of a single farmer farming a small piece of land. But of course, these large-scale farms that we have absolutely are interested in something like this. And even just you going on vacation, you care about the climate. What area is going to be best for you? If you're like me, having a lot of high temperatures or very low temperatures, like extreme temperatures, not the best for somebody like me. So if I'm going to an area, I'm going to try to find a place where the average temperature, the climate, is going to be pretty temperate. That way, yes, we might get a high or a low while I'm visiting, but I can safely assume it's going to be a pretty moderate temperature. Whoops. So what are some causes for weather or climate? Well, there are a lot of natural causes, and in fact, most of the stuff that happens with our weather or the climate, it's just the Earth's process. The reason that I put a volcano here, I know we don't typically think of volcanoes being involved in the weather system or the climate system, but there are these things called super eruptions. And yeah, we think about lava coming out of a volcano, but volcanoes also send out a lot of gases and a lot of these particulate, these little pieces that get sent up into the atmosphere, reflect sunlight, and they can actually bring down the temperature, sometimes by as much as 10 degrees Celsius on average. So it is pretty intense how much a volcano can affect it. Thankfully, we don't get super eruptions too often. You never know. Now, sorry, flat earthers, Earth does not stay in one place. We talked before about rotation. We talked before about revolution. And we talked about orbit. Remember, orbit is that path, like the sidewalk or the track that you run around. But the orbit itself is not perfectly round. It's kind of an oval or ellipse shape. And Earth is not perfectly straight up and down with the poles. We have it sort of tilted. And when I mean up and down, because there's not really an up or down in space, I'm talking up and down in relation to the sun. So when we're looking or when we're facing the sun, sometimes more of the southern hemisphere faces the sun during the day. And depending on where we're at, again, the tilt as well, sometimes more of the northern hemisphere faces the sun during the day. Because of all of these together, we get 4 seasons. And remember when I told you that sometimes it's the northern or southern hemisphere that faces the sun more during the day? This is the reason that we have those opposite seasons. So when it's winter in the northern hemisphere, it's going to be summer in the southern hemisphere. And it is pretty interesting because when you look at this image, the part where the Earth is actually closest to the sun or closer to the sun is going to be December and January, that time period. So even though it's closer to the sun, there's one hemisphere that's in the middle of winter. So that proximity to the sun, of course, matters, but really it's how much sun exposure that we're getting and what latitude we're getting it at as well. It also changes how long the daytime hours are. So that means that 2 days every year, the daytime hours will also equal the nighttime hours. And this is called an autumnal equinox and a vernal equinox, or a fall equinox or autumn equinox and a spring equinox. So if there's 2 days that are going to be equal, well, that would mean one day is going to be super long daylight hours, right? There is, and we call that the summer solstice. In the northern hemisphere, the northern hemisphere that happens in June, the southern hemisphere that happens in December. So then that would mean we get a day that has the shortest daytime hours, and that's going to be the winter solstice. The image here, this is actually going to be pretty interesting if you ever get to see something like this, where the sun really doesn't go up very high in the sky. It is pretty interesting to see that. And so this gives us sort of an idea here in terms of those special sun days that we encounter throughout the year. So this is actually going to be for the northern hemisphere. So when it says December 21 or 22 winter solstice, then if you're in the southern hemisphere, of course, that's going to be in the summer. So that's going to be your summer solstice. The autumnal equinox for September, that's the northern hemisphere. So in the southern hemisphere, that is the vernal or spring equinox. These days are pretty special. Okay, think about being back in time and you don't have a really handy calendar. You're not really sure how many days there are in a year. It's been calculated, but there's a couple times it does seem a bit funky. Is it 364 days? Is it 366 days? So it's really helpful for us to have these set sun days in the year for us to plan things. Think about stuff that you would plan here. You would need to know when to prepare for the cold winter, when to start preserving food, or when to start planting food. Of course, you can also work with the counting of the moons and the number of full moons that you get as well. But this is a really big way to split the year for sure. Also, for some traditions, there are these halfway points between these. So for example, between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice, there is a halfway point here, and that actually falls around Halloween. And it is pretty unremarkable that early people, and even for us today, just as a leftover, we have a lot of special holidays around these special days of the sun. So for one example, Christmas is something that we still celebrate, but this is actually has nothing to do with the Christian religion. in terms of the time of the year that it is. And I'll put a link to the video here. I think the video is pretty cute, pretty helpful, pretty interesting as well, and not too long, so that's good. Basically, there was a winter solstice celebration that existed in most places around the world. And it's a lot easier to introduce your different beliefs, or especially if you want to mesh beliefs. It's easier to get people to go along with it or to not see it as a threat if you allow them to celebrate traditional things that they celebrated or eat traditional foods that they're used to eating, rather than coming in and wiping the slate totally clean and changing it completely. So think about it like I'm trying to present a snack of crickets to you, or flies, or maggots. And I said, here's a handful. Please eat this snack of bugs. Now, if you're me, you would eat them. Bugs are really tasty. They're very delicious and sustainable and protein rich and all of that good stuff. But most of you are probably going to say, teacher, what are you doing? So what if I said you have a choice? You have to choose one. You have to, or I will kill you, okay? Or I'll put you into prison. So you have to choose one. You can just eat this handful of bugs, or I have this big bowl of ice cream. I can mix the bugs and smash them up and mix them into the ice cream. Which one would you choose? The handful of bugs or the bowl of ice cream that's been mixed with those bugs? For most people, if those are your only two choices, with the third choice being prison, you guys are probably going to choose the one with ice cream. And that's how these old holidays end up getting repainted with new religions, or having like newer religions stapled on top of them. If you look into the traditions of Christianity and the ideas that were discussed about, it has to do with the stars that were available in the sky at the time of the traditional accepted birth of Yeshua, also called Jesus. It's around April when it should have happened. As late as September, but definitely not in the middle of December. So this idea of December being the birth of that religious figure, it's not supported by their Bible. So this is the reason it happens at this time. It's just to kind of take over or make the changeover a little less jarring. So winter solstice is actually still celebrated today in different places around the world, and other people that also follow like pagan types of religions. So the winter solstice holidays in places of Europe are traditionally called Yule. And as the Yule log burns, it's sort of a gift to the sun, or to bring the sun back. And as long as it burns, you drink alcohol. Now, why would you drink alcohol? Of course, the first thought is, well, I've heard, or I've known from experience, that alcohol kind of warms up the body. It kind of increases your perception of warmth. It's in the middle of winter. That makes sense. But alcohol also has a different freezing point than water. It's lower than water. So if you have a choice of water or alcohol, but the water you have to melt first before you're able to drink it, the alcohol just makes it a little bit easier. Just pick that up right out of the snow and just start drinking it. The types of decorations associated with the European solstice are things like images of the sun, colors green and red. That's why the evergreen tree is going to be that tree that's really celebrated. That's the tree that's still green during that time of the year. Candles, again, that light or fire to kind of represent the sun. And just to be practical, it's pretty dark around this time of the year most of the hours in the day. Food stuff like certain types of fruits, nuts, or berries, and then Yule log decorations. There's also cakes that are shaped like Yule logs. If you guys have had any of these celebrations, please share with the rest of the class in the comment section. If you're in a place like China, you're going to get a lot of dumplings. So there are different traditions, but there are always traditions. That's something to remember. Fire is also part of these festivals in China, just like it is in Europe. Again, it makes sense. It's very practical. but it's also very symbolic. For both Eastern and Western celebrations, there's a focus on family, friends, food, and also helping others, including helping other animals such as stray cats. So, all of that being said, we figured out okay, there's different levels of sunshine during different times of the year. Because of that, we're going to get different temperatures. So, the Earth is not heated up uniformly. When the sunlight hits the planet, it doesn't heat everything up at the same level. That difference in temperature is what's going to give us wind. So let's think about this like being in a room. And you're inside a room, that room is very hot. Okay? Outside the room, let's say it's quite cold. Once you open the door, if you stand in the doorway, you're going to feel that difference, that movement of air. And eventually, if you keep the door open for a while, the temperatures are going to even out, and that's when that movement of air is going to slow to a stop. Okay. Another factor for the climate is going to be humidity. That's the amount of water in the air. It increases the chance of cloud formation, which is going to increase, the precipitation. It's also going to increase your perception of the heat or the perception of temperature. Just for those of you that really need that review, low humidity is dry air. Okay, so that's not a lot of water in the air. And we've got my little cacti earrings today. The biggest desert, by the way, on the planet is going to be Antarctica. Being hot is not a desert. Being dry, low precipitation, that's going to be the characteristic of a desert. Antarctica, of course, is a cold desert, but there are other cold deserts we will talk about later in the class. High humidity is going to be wet air. Just looking at this image makes me feel uncomfortable. I don't know about you. I'm not a fan of humidity at all. So I will again put a link to the video in the details section below, but maybe you've heard the phrase, it's not the heat, it's the humidity. What does that mean? If you look at the temperature, it might seem tolerable, but because of the high humidity, it seems just really, really extra hot, extra uncomfortable. As you probably know, when it's hot, you sweat. And as you are sweating and the temperature is high, you're going to have some of that sweat evaporated off of your body. And as it evaporates, it takes a little bit of heat with it. That's why we sweat, it's to cool our bodies down. And of course, it's just the water, so if you've ever had like some sweat and you kind of licked your hand, or you were sweating here around your mouth and you licked around your mouth for whatever reason and it tasted really salty, that's because only the water is going to get taken up and we leave the salts, which is also why please make sure you guys are getting enough salt, not just water, when it is quite hot. So if that's how your body cools down, is for that water to be evaporated into the air, that water off of your skin, that sweat. The reason that it feels really hot when it's humid is because there's already enough water in the air. It's not going to be something that evaporates off of your skin because of the existing humidity already in the air. So we end up having this thing called a heat index. The heat index is basically the temperature with the humidity, and then we get a feels like kind of temperature. So let's say that it is, 41 degrees Celsius, okay? If there's 0% humidity, it's going to feel like 35 degrees Celsius. It's not great, but tolerable. But compare that if we go to 43 degrees Celsius and what is this? 40% humidity. It's going to feel like it's 58 degrees Celsius outside. I mean, that's insufferable, right? I mean, that's horrible. This is a thing you need to consult if you do end up having really humid summers, or if you're going to travel to a humid area. Just looking at the temperature is not enough to tell you how to dress for the weather that day. So what about the human causes of climate change? So, as you probably know, our atmosphere traps heat, and this is something called the greenhouse effect. It's because, I mean, you guys probably know what a greenhouse is, where there's some panels that are going to allow the sunlight in, but they're going to prevent it from the heat from leaving very easily. And so that way, even in the middle of winter, you're able to grow fruits and vegetables and flowers and that sort of thing in this greenhouse. And so that's why we have this greenhouse effect. That's why we call it that. Without the greenhouse effect, we wouldn't trap any of that heat, so we would die from the cold. This is an image from Mars. But if it gets too hot, so we have too thick of an atmosphere, we can also die. So this is actually Venus, and we think that Venus does have that runaway greenhouse effect. A lot of the gases in Venus's atmosphere actually come from the volcanic activity on Venus, which is pretty interesting. At least I think it's interesting. So global climate change, this is what we usually say when we're really talking about anthropogenic climate change. And anthropogenic means it starts from humans, okay? The basic reason for this is that just like other systems, like the water cycle that we talked about, for example, we also have a CO2 cycle, a carbon dioxide cycle. The carbon dioxide cycle has a cycle that it works with. But when we start adding more stuff to it, that doesn't go and get put back into the cycle, that's just added on top. This is the basic idea behind why we can make climate change worse. Now, we used to call it global warming because we think it's really hot, but it confused some people because they didn't understand what climate was. And so when we'd get like a cold winter, they would say, how can the earth be getting warmer? We still have winter. Hopefully now you guys understand that doesn't work as an argument against it, because climate and weather are going to be different. So in the middle of a planet that's heating up, you can get record low temperatures. Absolutely. That's to be expected with this natural fluctuation that we have with the weather. But the big deal here is that when we average it out, we're not going to get this huge fluctuation from day to day or from year to year. Once we average it out, we see the pattern that overall the temperature is slowly going up. That's what we're looking at for that climate change, that pattern. Now, we did know the climate changes naturally, but we actually knew that humans could affect climate change way back in like the early 1900s. So this idea of climate change being a human, something that humans can affect, gosh, when I was younger, I'm trying to think when people really started to talk about it. We mostly talked about pollution and stuff. I think climate change that I can remember getting really big, maybe in the late 90s, early 2000s. At least, growing up without reading the news, most teenagers don't read the news. I wasn't any different. So in my situation, I don't really remember climate change being something I really heard about until around the late 90s or early 2000s. And so it gives you this idea that it's recently discovered, but it really, really isn't. And it's actually very frustrating to watch these old videos from the 60s, for example, where it talks about if we don't change this, then it's going to be hotter, and they were not wrong. So this stuff is actually quite predictable. And unfortunately, we like to pretend it isn't. Because change is difficult, right? Changing our ways is very slow, uncomfortable. And so some people will say, well, is it really that big of a deal? Who am I, right? If I make changes, but the rest of the world doesn't make changes, that's really not going to change much. So I'll just not change, right? That's what a lot of people tend to think. The other issue is for companies spending money to move the systems over, to switch the systems over from fossil fuel to other fuel sources such as renewable energy. That's something that costs money. And if they don't have to do it, if the government isn't suddenly forcing them to do it, for example, most companies are not going to do this just out of their idea of being a good citizen of Earth. Just give me a second here. Throat is getting a bit dry. Fight the humidity. So this is again a video that you guys will see in the details section below. It's just quite short. Just to go through these real quick, a lot of us are very familiar with solar energy, wind energy, but there's also rain energy, tidal energy, energy that we can take from the waves, and also geothermal. This is when it's literally the Earth's heat. We'll talk more about each of these when we discuss different sections around the world later on in the class. One big one, though, that we can kind of take care of is the amount of meat that we consume. This is really not a popular thing to discuss. Really is not. However, it's a fact. I mean, there's really nothing to argue. It is a fact that if we all stopped eating meat, or at least factory farmed meat, if you guys still want to go hunting, totally not part of this. But if we stop eating factory farmed meat, we just produce fewer emissions, fewer greenhouse gases. That's just a fact. Now, does that mean you have to go vegan? Not necessarily. We are going to look at a little bit of the video just to avoid any kind of copyright detection. We can definitely use these videos to have commentary on. Obviously, I'm not claiming these are my videos, but if you have the sound on, sometimes YouTube will automatically like flag the video. So just to avoid that, I am going to not have the sound, but if you guys are not watching and you're just listening, I will narrate this for you. So the narrator is talking about ribeye steak, and this narrator loves ribeye steak. And they say if you look at everything that went into making the single serving of beef, excuse me again, then you end up emitting about 330 grams of carbon per serving of beef. So if we actually compare this, it's like driving your car 3 miles, or what would that be, between 4 and 5 kilometers. If you're going to choose chicken, instead, the same serving is going to be 52 grams of that greenhouse gas emissions compared to 330. Why would that be? If you guys want to try to answer that, pause the video. Why would that be? And this is because cows are big. They're going to require a lot of food, which is going to require us to do things like clear parts of the, for example, parts of the rainforest in Brazil. That's being cleared just to grow soy, not for human consumption. It's not like, oh, these silly vegans and their soy, you know, they're eating all this tofu. This soybeans that are grown this way, they're actually to feed cattle. So this is not only all that extra transport that needs to go. If you're growing soybeans, you have to transport it to the animals to be fed, and that produces greenhouse gas emissions. But that also means because we cut down those trees, we are still interrupting that CO2 cycle. On top of that, it takes a while before a cow can be brought to slaughter. Chickens grow very quickly based on artificial selection. So we have figured out how to get a chicken from first day of being hatched to fully grown and ready to slaughter. Gosh, what is it? 50-something days. You can't do that with a cow. So part of the reason that there's such a difference, even though they're both meat, it's not that one is red meat and one is white meat or anything. It's just the size of the animal and how long it takes before the animal can be brought to slaughter. So can we go even lower? We can if we get something like salmon or any fish, really. So that serving, again, is going to drop down to 40 grams of this the greenhouse gas emissions. But if you're going to get vegetables, it's going to be 14 grams. Again, a lot of this is also just the transport. So hopefully you're getting local vegetables. If you live in an area like I do, where avocados are not a natural product here and you're getting them flown in, it's going to affect the amount of greenhouse gas emissions for sure. So we do want to stay local if possible. So with beef or lamb, why is this going to be such a detriment, right? And so they're talking about, again, excuse me, the size of the animal. Um, Also, the amount of greenhouse gases the animal produces in terms of like the gases the animal produces itself during digestion. So all of these together are going to really affect that. And again, you guys can watch the video. It will be linked in the details section below. But if you guys have any questions on that, now just to let you know, since we are talking about it, when I cook at home, I cook either vegan food, and it's nothing fancy. It's just vegetables and tofu or vegetables and beans, nothing fancy. I don't have any of those super expensive vegan products or anything. So it is quite cheap too. That's another benefit, especially if you guys are going to be a poor college student later on, getting some pasta noodles, dry pasta noodles and some frozen vegetables. I mean, that's a pretty solid meal, right? Assuming you season it and add good sauce to it, whatever. For some of my other meals, vegetarian and on occasion pescatarian, so those are seafood will be included. But just based on where I live in Korea, it's pretty difficult to eat vegan if you go out, so I don't. Don't think that I'm posting this and saying, yeah, I'm a really strict vegan and I'm gonna judge you because you eat meat. I ate meat yesterday. It's chicken, if you're curious. I ate meat yesterday. Um, so we can still see here, they do include that. Yes, there's heavy meat eaters, and yes, there's vegans, but they also include medium meat eaters and low meat eaters. The heavy meat eaters, I believe, are people that eat meat for every meal. So for breakfast, you're going to include some kind of meat. Lunch, dinner, you're including meat. Maybe you snack on beef jerky on top of that. That's what we're talking about for heavy meat eaters or people that they eat more than one serving of meat at a time. So having several slices of bacon instead of the recommended serving. Low meat eaters, those are going to be, again, people that are not eating meat very often, maybe breakfast. You don't have any meat. You might just have some eggs or cereal or something for breakfast. It's not common for you to have meat. You don't mind having a meal that doesn't include meat. You maybe don't seek it out. You're not actively vegetarian or vegan. But if you have a meal of like spaghetti with tomato sauce, for example, and a side of salad and garlic bread, there's no meat there, but a lot of people really enjoy that kind of food. It's a pretty tasty meal. Who doesn't like garlic bread, right? But you can also kind of cut that down for pescatarians, vegetarians, and then vegans. The reason vegetarians and vegans do have that big jump here, more than between pescatarians and vegetarians, is because vegetarians still consume milk, and that is a cow product. So all of the problems that we have from meat consumption from the cow, we're still going to get very similar problems from that consumption of milk. And similar again with the chicken. Yes, you're not eating the meat of the chicken, but you are eating the eggs. That still requires the chicken to be alive and needing feed and all of that stuff. So that's the reason that vegetarians and vegans have such a big jump, but pescatarians and vegetarians don't have such of a difference between those. If you guys are curious about cutting down your consumption of meat, please feel free to post it in the comments section below. If you are worried about being attacked, please feel free to check out the pinned comment with my Discord link, and then you can message me privately. You can send me a DM on Discord. That way you won't have to worry about getting attacked by anybody that just might show up. Please be respectful of people in the comments section, of course. If you guys are going to be rude, your comments deleted, you're going to be blocked from the channel. Of course, we want to have discussion, but we have to be polite, minor friendly, and all of that good stuff. But yeah, if you guys are interested in any of this, because I did actually go pretty strictly vegan for about 3 years. I'm not a strict vegan anymore. It was for the health and the environment, not so much for the animals. I care about animals, but it just isn't enough for me to do that. I wish I had that level of empathy. I just don't. I love animals, but for some reason just not, there's still that disconnect. So I totally understand people that still have that disconnect. Um, but if you guys are interested in that, feel free to ask about it, because again, this is something you can do that's way, way more impactful than not using plastic straws, you know. But speaking of that, what is the best diet for you in terms of emissions? The one that you're going to stick to. If you are a heavy meat eater and the idea of going pescatarian, let alone vegetarian or vegan, just sounds absolutely not doable, unsustainable for you, just go to medium meat eating. It's the same when we're talking about diets for weight loss. Which is the best diet for weight loss? There's so many. It's the one you're going to stick to. What's the best cardio exercise to do? The one that you like doing and you're going to stick to doing. That's the best thing. So this is why I wanted to include these different options here, because you don't have to just completely cut out meat. I know that is pretty difficult for a lot of people. You can do these different things. And of course, when we're talking about the climate and climate change, you might wonder, what could I do? Voting. Once you guys are, if you guys are minors, once you guys are of age in your country to vote, try to see, what issues are being voted on? What are the politicians voting for? Do I support those politicians? Can I influence those politicians? Maybe I can write to them or make a video that goes viral, or otherwise, get some kind of hashtag trending or something like that, to encourage certain politicians to make certain changes on our behalf. If that's the type of stuff you like doing, yeah, that's going to be probably a lot more helpful than you giving up meat, if you're a heavy meat eater. If that is a type of influence that you are capable of, that's totally awesome if that's you. So, you really want to figure out, what are some things that I'm doing that I don't have to do? And I would recommend trying it for 30 days. And that's one thing that I do give my students when we do get to this lesson, is 30 days doing something that's environmentally friendly that you otherwise wouldn't do. So if you like to drink water throughout the day, but you always buy a new bottle of water, bring a bottle of water, or reuse a bag, or something along those lines, and they can write that in there. But if they maintain the change for the whole month, so they choose one thing and then they maintain it, then they get extra credit for doing that. So I would recommend trying that for 30 days just to see. Again, it can be one change that you stick to for 30 days, or something different that you do. Oh, today I took a shorter shower. Then the next day, oh, I had that spaghetti with tomato sauce, salad, and garlic bread thing that Miss Lemon was talking about. So I had a meal that didn't include meat. That would be a positive change. That's an environmentally friendly change. The reason I'm, talking about this so much is I love that there's so much connectivity, and that teenagers especially can be so excited about making changes and putting their stamp on the world, and making this impact on life, but how to do it the right way. So a lot of times when we talk about this climate change issue, I remember being in school and just thinking, okay, so what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? Here we are, talking about how bad it is, but how do we contribute to making it better? And that was never discussed in our classes. The teacher just didn't discuss that with us. So I always like to discuss that, because I feel like, teenager age group, you guys are always ready to rock and roll, and that's awesome, ready to just go out there and make changes. So these are hopefully some ideas that you can definitely make changes. And again, try them out, see what you can do. The sustainable one is the one that you want to do. The sustainable for you, not necessarily sustainable for the environment. And of course, we see these steps here. You can think about it as baby steps. You can go from heavy meat eating down to medium, down to low, and so on, if your ultimate goal is to completely cut meat out for the best environmental impact. On that note, I will let you guys go. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and Again, feel free to post in the comments section as long as you guys are being respectful. All right. Bye, students. I will see you guys next time.